The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015 already. Thanks for tuning in this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we have not met before and you don't know me, I'm a workforce advisor, organizational psychologist, management consultant, speaker, and author. And my team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture, inspirational leadership, and nurturing managers activated by meaning and purpose. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. If you're just tuning into the program, we have with us today Dr. Ryan Gottfredson. He is a cutting-edge leadership development author, researcher, and consultant. He helps organizations vertically develop their leaders, primarily through a focus on mindsets to elevate the organization and culture. He is the author of The Elevated Leader, Leveling Up Your Leadership Through Vertical Development. He has another book out as well and other things that he's been working on since. But today we'll be talking about the difference between horizontal development and vertical development in leadership development and how leaders and their organizations elevate through vertical development. He joins us today from Orange County, California. Ryan, a hearty welcome to Working on Purpose.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I love this concept of working on purpose. And here's why, and we'll get into the details. But I've spent the last 15, 16 years doing both academic and applied research to study what makes great leaders great. And leaders operate at different levels of sophistication. And what I've learned is that the most sophisticated leaders all have a purpose, and it's a purpose that is connected to something bigger than themselves, and it's about creating value to their primary stakeholders. So I'm so fortunate to be on the show. Thank you for having me. And I'm excited to help leaders better work on purpose.
Well, Ryan, you and I are so crazy aligned. It's crazy. It's just, I devoured your book, as I told you. I know you've written a few. And as you mentioned to me before we got on air, you've, of course, your thoughts continue to advance. So much gold, though, just to be able to harvest out of this one, The Elevated Leader. So I do want to definitely give our listeners and viewers some good nuggets from that. And we can also talk a little bit about some of the other things that you've been working on, too. But I want to just really start with this idea here. You and I, of course, have been doing this work together for some time where, we're working with organizations, but many leaders, think they're doing just fine, running their organizations. Everything's good. And so they don't think that they need any help or any development. So can you talk a little bit about kind of what that missing is, that sort of ignorance that comes with that stance, if you will?
Yeah, let me use a metaphor if that's okay. And the metaphor, this is going to make a lot of sense if you've ever driven manual transmission of a vehicle. So
I have.
Think about a manual transmission vehicle. We got 5 gears. So what I've learned is that most leaders operate in 4th gear. In fact, research suggests that 85% of leaders operate in 4th gear. Now, what's 4th gear? 4th gear is a really great place to be because in 4th gear, you can go really fast and you could get a lot done. But at the same time, when we're operating in 4th gear going really fast, we're going at really high RPMs. And you could feel the speed. And what I've learned is that most leaders are in this place. They're going fast, they are pushing hard, going at high RPMs, and their bodies almost get addicted to that feeling of speed because to their bodies, feeling speed feels like progress. Mm-hmm. And so this is where most leaders operate. But what and they know that this is a good place to be because it's better than third gear, it's better than second gear, and it's better than first gear. So these are advanced leaders. But what they oftentimes don't recognize is that there is a fifth gear. And the great thing about getting into fifth gear is if we could get into fifth gear, then what ends up happening is we could actually go faster and at lower RPMs. And that's the beauty of fifth gear. And what research has found is that only 8% of executives get there. And so I kind of feel like it's my purpose, my mission to help leaders awaken to what fourth gear leadership is, and then help them to shift gears and get into fifth gear.
I love that. And I love how you talk about it on your LinkedIn profile too, because it's so crisp. And what I think is beautiful, because you do say that only 8% of leaders really get there. And to me, that represents such an opportunity for everyone, for us to be able to help and serve, and for leaders to recognize that we can get to fifth gear. So I think that's really exciting. And the other thing that you talk about in your book that I think is important is that when leaders aren't actively working on elevating their mindsets and their operating system, like you talk about in your book, they're already operating at a leadership deficit in today's incredibly fast moving, crazy high pressure moving environment. And I think that's really important to point out. If you're not working on this, you are being left behind.
Well, yeah, I think one of the ways to think about it is as we shift into the higher gears. So as we go from first to second, second to third, right? As we just move our way up, we become a more complex being.
Yeah.
And that's one of the benefits of that. And the more complex we are, the greater our ability to navigate complexity.
Right.
And so what we've seen over the last, really, let's just say in the last 7 years, we have seen complexity of our world go up and up and up and up. And so the question that we've got to ask ourselves is, has our personal complexity followed the pace of the rising complexity of our environment around us? And for most leaders, unfortunately, they haven't, at least to the degree that it needs to. And so as the complexity of our world, like if our complexity exceeds our environmental complexity, we can navigate that world really well. We're going to be successful. But if the complexity of our world starts to exceed our complexity, then we start to feel like we're in over our heads. We start to experience burnout. And that's what I'm seeing from the executives that I work with. And they just don't recognize that at the root of the issue is this dynamic between their personal complexity and the complexity in the world around them. And let's just face it, the complexity of our world is unlikely to decrease.
Right.
So really our only option is to elevate ourselves. And if we can do that, then we can better navigate the complexity in the world around us.
Yeah. And I do want to talk more about, kind of how do we recognize that we actually might need some help as a leader? I mean, you talk about, George, the guy that you worked for some time ago. I do want to get into that at some point because I want our listeners and viewers to start to recognize, oh, that kind of sounds like me. I do that. There's something wrong with that. I could do better than that. But I do want to, let's situate the idea of, you distinguish between horizontal leadership development and vertical. And I hadn't really ever heard those terms, although I have a very steep background in developmental psychology too, like you do. And I hadn't heard those terms.
Yeah, these terms are fairly new, at least the vertical development term. So that term was coined about 13 years ago. It's growing in terms of it being well-known or more well-known. But the basic concept is that we can develop in two different ways. And one of these ways, I'm going to call it the horizontal development path, is what most people take, and we are all familiar with it because it's what our education system runs on, it's what our athletic programs run on, and it's what our organizational development runs on. And so we are familiar there, and I'll describe it here in just a second. But there's another path, and that's the vertical development path. And if people could step onto this path, what they're going to find is that this is a path that is transformational. Horizontal development is good. There's nothing wrong with it, but it can only be incrementally helpful. Vertical development is transformational. And here's why. So horizontal development is improving our talent, our knowledge, and our skills. It's kind of like adding tools to our tool belt, right? There's nothing wrong with adding tools to our tool belt. In fact, we need to do that. And that's what our schools are designed to do. That's what our athletics programs are designed to do, and organizational development. But at the end of the day, our effectiveness is not based on the tools in our tool belt, but our capacity to leverage the tools in our tool belt. And that's what vertical development is all about, upgrading the person wearing the tool belt so that they have a greater capacity to employ the tools. Let me give you a quick example, if that's okay.
You bet.
So here's what I believe I've learned is that almost all leaders know how to listen. They have the knowledge on how to do so, and they have the skills to do so because they have done so in the past. But what I find is that a lot of leaders struggle to listen when they are feeling rushed, stressed out, and pressured. And so we know how to listen, but most leaders aren't able to employ that tool because they aren't vertically developed enough to be able to employ that tool in those high pressure situations. And so when we do vertical development work, what we're doing is we're upgrading our body's internal operating system, literally our nervous system, so that we could better navigate the change, stress, pressure, uncertainty, and complexity in the world around us.
And I love how you distinguish and you say the way that we do that is we're elevating our operating system specifically by increasing the sophistication of our emotional and our cognitive capacities. I think that's really compelling to understand that, that's how you isolate that. That's what we're upgrading and elevating. And I love how, and that's the person wearing the tool belt. So I think it's helpful. And I did take your assessment as well. If we could, I know what you've done, Ryan, is you've gone through and looked at all these different other developmental models, and they have anywhere from 3 to 12 stages of development. You have been able to isolate really a 3-stage, Mind 1, Mind 2, and Mind 3.0. For our listeners and viewers who haven't read your book like I have, can you just distinguish those 3 levels for us and kind of who they are and what's going on in those levels?
Yeah. So where these ideas and these stages come from is from the field of adult development psychology. So adult development psychologists have learned that in adulthood, we can develop, and there's different adult development stages. Now, the number of stages that are out there is contingent upon the thought leader who kind of designed a model. And so to your point is I've seen thought leaders with 3 adult development stages, and I've seen it up to 12. But at the end of the day, they all collapse onto 3 base adult development stages. Now, what's interesting about this is for the longest time, adult development or developmental psychologists assumed that we stopped developing in adulthood. But that's not the case. We do have these different stages. But what's really interesting about their research is that while there are 3 base adult development stages, they find that most adults never develop in adulthood. So there are 3 stages, but 64% stay at that base level. What I call, as you labeled, Mind 1.0. And then we have Mind 2.0. 35% of all adults get there. And then only 1% gets to that Mind 3.0 level. And that's it, so once you have a framework like that, then it becomes easy to say, oh, well, where am I at? What level do I operate at? And it really opens the door for a deep level of introspection, awakening, and if we so choose to do so, I think it really can empower us to level up ourselves.
Yeah. And just to kind of quickly share a little bit about that. I mean, level 1 is really focused. Their needs are about safety, comfort, and belonging. And I have seen that in some of the managers that I've worked with. I've seen that stay under the radar kind of thing. And so they tend to be people pleasers or controlling, those 2 things. And I wonder if George, the person you had before, that you worked before, would be an example of a Mind 1.0 leader. Was that right? Or is he closer to 2?
Yeah, sometimes they can show up differently, depending on, it's really, we're connecting into their motives. And so one of the things that I want to bring up and why I label it Mind 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 is our bodies at each of these levels are programmed to fulfill different needs. And we shift from one level to another. There's a shift in these needs. There's an upgrade. So to your point, at Mind 1.0, our bodies are wired to be safe, comfortable, and feel like we belong. We kind of want to stay, we don't want to rock the boat, but we want to create some structure. We want to do good things. But the foundational motives is, I don't want to cause any problems. And let's point out something. Like if that's our focus, where is our focus? It's on me. I don't want to cause any problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do reference a manager in my book named George. George is a leader that I used to have, and he was kind of the stereotypical authoritative micromanaging leader. And I have seen these leaders, these types of leaders operate from a Mind 1.0 level. Because they micromanage because they want to make sure nothing goes wrong on their watch.
Yeah.
Right. In this case with George, I think that George was more of a Mind 2.0 leader. So at Mind 2.0, our bodies aren't wired for safety, comfort, and belonging. In fact, they're wired to stand out, advance, and get ahead.
Okay.
And we know that we've leveled up here because now we're willing to be unsafe, uncomfortable, and not belong in order to stand out, advance, and get ahead. So we move from this mentality of, as a leader, I don't want anything to go wrong, to now I want to be seen as the best. And this is actually the fourth gear that I mentioned earlier, is this Mind 2.0 level. So I actually think George, in this instance, his motives seem to come from a place of his authority, need for control, micromanaging, was because he wanted to be seen as the best. He wanted, if me as a subordinate was successful, he would take the credit for it, so other people would see him as a success. And so that's the Mind 2.0 level. So I don't know if you want to slow down at all and go.
No, I want to keep
more
moving
about these first two levels.
There's so many. Let's just quickly hit 3.0 because we're going to grab our break after that. So talk to us about 3.0 because that's what you and I are out to help our leaders grow into.
Yeah, perfect. So at the Mind 1.0 level, again, we're wired to stand in. Now at the Mind 2.0 level, we're wired to stand out. At Mind 3.0, we're not wired to stand in and we're not wired to stand out. So what are we wired for? We're wired to contribute, add value, and lift others. And this is why purpose is so important.
Yeah.
Is that we need to have a purpose to get us into that frame of mind for our body to be wired to contribute, add value, and lift others. That should be driven by a purpose that's bigger than ourselves. And so not only do our needs change as we go from bottom to top, if you will, but our complexity of thinking changes. At Mind 1.0, we're an independent thinker. You tell me what to do and I will go and do it. At Mind 2.0, we're an independent thinker.
Oh, so first independent and then independent. Yes.
So
okay.
It's, so dependent thinker is Mind 1.0.
Okay.
Independent thinker is Mind 2.0. I've got my own ideas and I want to run with them so I could be recognized. At Mind 3.0, we are now an interdependent thinker, right? We recognize, I have some good ideas, but they're not the only good ideas. And that collectively, we could come up with great ideas. Also, those at the lower levels tend to be more short-term oriented, focused on standing in right now or standing out right now, whereas those at Mind 3.0 are now focused on a longer-term purpose.
Beautiful, Ryan. It's just so exciting for our listeners and viewers to start to recognize, there's more for me. I can do more. As you say, only 3% of executives are in that.
8% are in that Mind 3.0.
8%, yes. And so much room for us to be able to help and lift. So on that note, let's let our listeners and viewers reflect on those 3 levels, consider where they might be, and take our first break. I'm Elise Cortez, your host. We've been on the air with Ryan Gottfredson, who is a cutting-edge leadership development author, researcher, and consultant. He helps organizations vertically develop their leaders primarily through a focus on mindsets to elevate the organization and culture. We've been talking about the difference between vertical and horizontal development. After the break, we're going to dive into how we can start to take the journey into vertical development. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As I too am dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive. They are also led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness. And we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. And one of my latest came out. It's called The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand today's workforce. What do they want and need to stay with you and give their best? And then I provide you 22 best practices to equip your culture to be able to provide that for them. You can find my books on Amazon or my personal site, elisecortez.com. If you are just joining us, my guest is Ryan Gottfredson. He is the author of a few books. One of them is The Elevated Leader: Leveling Up Your Leadership Through Vertical Development. So before we get into a bit of how we can step into this world of vertical development, Ryan, I do want to do something for our listeners and viewers, and that's to help kind of bring to life what might a level 2 and a level 3 leader look like. So you do a beautiful job in your book of really helping us compare the worlds of Microsoft when Steve Ballmer was the CEO and really performed more on that level 2.0. And then, of course, Satya Nadella, who has done an incredible job of turning the organization around and has been performing at a level 3.0. So can you kind of bring those two leaders to life so our listeners and viewers understand, just the opportunity of this 3.0 beckoning we're talking about?
Yeah. And I think even as we get into these examples, what I've learned is that the vertical altitude of a leader sets the ceiling for the effectiveness of the organization.
Yes.
It is almost impossible for an organization to operate at a more sophisticated level than the leader. And so, when we compare and contrast leaders, in this case, Steve Ballmer to Satya Nadella, one of the things that I would say, and I think the evidence is there, it's not to say that Steve Ballmer's a bad person. He's just not as sophisticated of a leader as Satya Nadella. And we could kind of look at the success of Microsoft under their tenures and see that that's very much the case. The effect that Steve Ballmer had was very minimal. Microsoft stayed stagnant really throughout his tenure. But since Satya Nadella has taken over, it's been almost a hockey stick curve upwards in terms of their success and impact on the world. And so what are some of the signs and signals that we'll find from the leaders at these different levels? So one of the things is interesting is when you take Steve Ballmer, and you could YouTube this, YouTube Steve Ballmer on stage. All right. When he would get on stage, it was like a rock concert. He would get up, loud music. He'd be dancing around, out of breath. And then in the YouTube video, you could kind of hear him as he's dancing around, throw his arms in the air. And he says, "Give it up for me."
Wow.
And so it's kind of a see me. Now, when Satya Nadella gets on stage, it's a very different approach. It's almost like he's kind of subdued. Now that's a little bit extreme, but it's kind of level. But he's speaking with intention. And whenever he's speaking in a meaningful way, he's connecting back to purpose. And so he sees getting on stage as an opportunity to clarify and unite through purpose. And so that's one of the big differences, right? So Mind 2.0 leaders tend to focus on results. Mind 3.0 focuses on purpose. So I would say results and ourselves. Mind 3.0 is purpose and something bigger than ourselves. Mm-hmm. So that's one signal. Another signal in this case was Steve Ballmer was famous for saying, "My kids will never use an Apple product."
Yeah.
But Satya Nadella's first public speech, at a conference, he pulled an iPhone out of his pocket. And so in Steve Ballmer's mind, it was about competition. We've got to win. And in Satya Nadella's mind, it's not about win or lose. It's how can we create value for our stakeholders, right? Because if we can integrate Microsoft products with Apple phones and computers, look, we're going to rapidly expand our customer base.
Right.
And so that was a big shift early on in Satya Nadella's tenure that was really valuable. And so that's another signal. And I think another signal is Steve Ballmer didn't really focus on culture. Evidence of that is he instituted stacked rank performance management systems. Right. In his mind, it was help them to identify the people who stand out, right? That's that Mind 2.0 mentality. And when Satya Nadella came in, he took out the stacked rank performance management system. And in his book, Hit Refresh, he says, the C in CEO stands for curator of culture. And so what he sees as this Mind 3.0 leader, again, a more interdependent thinker, he sees the systems that go into outcomes. Steve Ballmer focused on the outcomes. Satya Nadella focused on the systems like culture. And he knew if we can get the systems right, the outcomes will take care of themselves. And that's what's been the case. So those are some different signs or signals. And I think those two individuals provide a good contrast to kind of explain the difference between Mind 2.0 and Mind 3.0 leaders.
Excellent, Ryan. That's just what I wanted. Thank you. So for this next bit here, I just want to dive in a bit to help our listeners and viewers understand how they might start this process. I know you do a lot of work with organizations diving deep into vertical development, but let's just kind of give our listeners and viewers sort of a taste. I know we're going to talk about mindsets and how they're formed, of course, and why that's important. But where do you want to go to help our listeners understand how to start diving into vertical development?
Yeah, great. So again, we are really familiar with horizontal development. And vertical development, I'm not going to say it's any more difficult or any more easy, but it is going to be different than what we're used to. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways that I've come to think about this is at a foundational level, vertical development is about upgrading our body's internal operating system, literally our nervous system. And so to know if it's vertical development work is it improving our body's regulation? Because, and maybe I should have said this earlier, when we're lower on the lower levels, like bottom Mind 1.0, our bodies are more reactive. We are more easily triggered. As we move up to the higher levels, we have a wider window of tolerance. We're less likely to be triggered, and we could stay more calm and composed. That's one of the reasons why we could navigate complexity at a higher level. And so I think about vertical development work as occurring at potentially 3 different levels: surface level, deeper level, and deepest level. So surface level tactics are things like meditation, journaling, yoga, gratitude journaling, even cold plunging can be surface level vertical development efforts, because what these activities do is they help us learn how to better regulate our body and it refines our body's nervous system. So I say that's surface level because it's something everybody can do, and it kind of globally helps us improve ourselves. The next level, if we want to get deeper, and this is the space that I play largely when I work with organizations, is we want to become aware of the programming baked into our internal operating system. So for me, I focus on mindsets. I help leaders and employees awaken to the wiring involved in their mindset. So for example, how do you see failure? Something to avoid or an opportunity to learn and grow? Right? And we could connect into our body's programming through a focus on mindsets. So that's the deeper level, but there's still deeper levels. At the deepest level, we generally need some form of professional support. Usually this comes in some form of therapy. You could think trauma therapy, neurofeedback therapy. Even I've kind of got my eyes on research connected to psychedelic assisted therapy and how that might help us heal and refine our body's nervous system. So, I'm not saying that's where we have to go, But I have learned that that's where many of us need to get into if we really want to become the people that we want to become. So hopefully that just provides a taste of what vertical development looks like at different levels of depth. But happy to dive into greater depth on any of those if you'd like.
Yeah. So first, let me just share for listeners and viewers, because I've devoured this book, as you know. I really appreciate that you talk about just the utility even of being able to have language around our mindsets and kind of how it is we're framing things. The other thing that I think is really incredibly useful and distinguished about your work, Ryan, is that you do call out the centrality of trauma. For every one of us, for the most part, have gone through some kind of trauma. And so many people are like, I don't have any fears. Nothing happened to me. I'm good. And yet what you talk about is the resistance to vertical development often indicates that there's probably something there to be able to heal and to address. And that, most of us are benefit. And even just reading your book helped me, Ryan, get more present to, I did go through that. I can start to see how that changes how I relate to people, how I let people in or don't let them in. So thank you for that gift. So I want to just go a little bit deeper, because I think part of what you do in your work is you're helping to hold up that mirror so people can start to recognize, when they can't attune to their team because they're not connected to their body or their emotions anymore. That's part of it, the issue. So if you could say a little bit more about just, some of these things that you start to notice when you're working with leaders that they resist, or you recognize, you've got 3 different ways that people tend to respond to you. If you could go into a little bit of detail on that.
Yeah, let me give you an example. I was working with the CEO of an organization. He's a founder of the organization. And in the year and a half prior to me working with the organization had grown from 500 employees to 1,000. So they had doubled in terms of employee count. And that's rather remarkable, right? In that span of time. So in some metrics, it was a successful organization. But what I came to learn is if you start to talk to the leaders in the organization, particularly his executive team, they were all burnt out and most were looking to exit. Mm-hmm. So while the metrics on the outside appeared pretty good, internally, it felt like it was crumbling. And so that's kind of why I was brought in to help kind of stabilize the situation. And so in my first conversation with the CEO, I asked him, why did you start your business? And his answer was to prove others wrong.
Oh, yeah. Talk about it in the book.
And it just struck me like, that's not I'm not going to say that's a terrible answer, but what it pointed to me is his motives are coming from a place of pain. He has been hurt somehow in the past professionally, and he has been driven not to create value for others, but to help ensure that he feels of value. Mm-hmm. And when we operate from that place, again, he was doing some really good things, but there was a wake of kind of collateral damage that was falling out behind him. And it ultimately came from a place of hurt. And what I've learned is that I'm not going to say this as a blanket statement of all leaders who are struggling or kind of ineffective, which, statistics are that's the majority of leaders. I'm not going to say that it's all because of trauma, but what I've learned is that hurt people have a hard time leading effectively. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why this is so meaningful to me, I'll give you a couple. One is I've had to awaken to my own trauma in my past, which previously I had not been aware of and ignored.
And you talk about in that book so beautifully, Ryan. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. And so I've had to do some of that healing work, and that's been transformational. And what I've learned through the journey is vertical development at its very core, right? I talked to earlier, it's about improving our body's nervous system. But let me take it even a level kind of, deeper, maybe more meaningful, which is vertical development at its core is about healing our minds, our bodies, and our hearts.
Yes.
Because healed leaders are powerful leaders. They are great leaders. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, that's kind of what I feel like is my purpose, is to help leaders to heal so that they could show up in higher and better ways.
Let's let our listeners and viewers just chew on that. Beautiful. What a beautiful way to be in the world, Ryan, and to be of service. I'm so happy to know you, to share with my listeners and viewers, and to be walking, in step with you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We went on air with Ryan Gottfredson. He is a cutting edge leadership development author, researcher, and consultant. He helps organizations vertically develop their leaders primarily through a focus on mindsets to elevate the organization and culture. We've been talking a bit about the opportunity and the promise and what's involved in vertical development. After the break, we'll talk a bit more about advancing it and the hope that's on the other side of that. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As you know by now, this program is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you along your journey to realize more of your potential. And if you want to learn more about the work we're doing together in the Gusto Now Academy, make your way to gusto-now.com, go to the training tab, and you can find the Academy and see if that's right for you or your team. If you are just joining us, my guest is Ryan Gottfredson. He is the author of The Elevated Leader, Leveling Up Your Leadership Through Vertical Development. So one of the other many things that I thought was fascinating about your book, and I want to give us still a little bit of time to talk about what else you're doing as well since this book came out, but you do distinguish between top-down approaches to vertical development and bottom-up approaches. So if you could distinguish those two, I know you primarily work with the top-down approaches, but if you could distinguish those two for us and tell us a bit more about how top-down does work.
Yeah, these concepts of top-down and bottom-up relate to our body. So top down is starting with our head and essentially getting into our heart. Bottom up is getting from our heart and going to our head. So this terminology comes largely from the psychology literature, oftentimes in kind of the therapeutic setting. With the basic idea is with our nervous system, we got a connection between our mind and our body and heart. And oftentimes when people have experienced trauma, there's just that connection. While it's hard for us to sense it in ourselves, that connection might be weaker. And when that connection is weaker, we do see the symptoms of that in terms of our level of reactivity, the width of our window of tolerance, our level of dissociation, or our level of anxiety, for example. So those are all signals that might, if we have issues with any of those things, that suggest that this connection between our head and our heart isn't quite as strong as it could be. And so there's different processes and therapeutic modalities that kind of can go either top down or bottom up. So to your point, when I work with organizations and do the mindset work, what we're doing is we're going top down. I'm introducing them to mindset concepts. I'm helping them to cognitively pick up on this. And then once I do so, I'll have them to step into kind of what are the emotions that are going on here? What fears are coming up for you? And then ultimately, how does that feel in your body? And what we've learned is that as you make those steps down, it helps strengthen that connection. Conversely, now, what I've learned is that some people have a really hard time stepping into this cognitively. Right? Because their body's defensive mechanisms come up so quickly. And so what, in that case, what generally needs to happen is they need to start from the bottom up, where they start in the heart with their feelings. What are you feeling in your body? Oh, where did those feelings come from? What now emotions come up for you? Now let's make sense and connect the dots. cognitively. So that movement from bottom up, and that's if we were to look at the kind of trauma therapy research, that bottom up approach is generally a deep healing approach. Now that top down isn't, I'm just going to say, doesn't feel as deep to me. It's a little bit more approachable. And that's why I feel like I could do that work at a corporate level. Whereas generally, if we want to go bottom up, we probably need some sort of therapeutic help. But what I've learned from my personal experience is I've done both, and I've done both simultaneously. And so one is good. Both together is incredibly transformational. And so again, this is just kind of languaging that comes from the psychology literature that hopefully just kind of opens up some pathways that we could think about. How do I want to go about vertically developing?
It's just so yummy on so many levels. And, what's exciting for me, Ryan, is, and I know this has happened for you too, is, when we do this work well inside organizations, we help leaders to transform. Now we're impacting their culture as well, is when you get the call from their significant other saying, thank you. That is where, something's really happened here. And that's some of the most joyful part of my world. And I'm sure you have the same thing, but it's so important. I have, over the years, I've had like Santa Claus on my podcast around the holidays. Right. And one year, Santa Claus and I were talking about the import of taking care of and healing. And he said in his Southern accent, because of course he's a Southern Santa, it's like, hurt people.
Yep.
And I think that's really important to recognize, and so that all of us are members of the walking wounded. None of us get out of this thing without being hurt. Yep. And so, doing this work is really important. I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more. You mentioned us before we got on air that since this book has come out, you've done all kinds of other things. Your thinking has continued to evolve. I want to give you a chance to share a little bit more about that. I do want to finish the show at the very end, with some inspirational leaders that people can kind of think about. Yeah, I want to grow into something like that. But tell us about some of these other things that you've been doing since the Elevated Leader came out, and what have you learned since that would also be helpful to this conversation?
Yeah, one of the things, of course, The Elevated Leader is the title of, that's my second book, and it's clearly for a leadership audience. And of course, that's who I typically work with as a consultant. But let me tell a story, if it's okay, related to family impact. So I'm working with an executive team. The most senior member on the team, he wasn't the CEO, he was the COO of the organization, had been tenured there for 30 years, nearing retirement. So he's kind of in his early 60s. And we started doing this work, and he we did the work. And then about 6 months later, I had the opportunity to come back and work with the team again and just kind of say, all right, let's follow through. What was the impact of doing this vertical development work? And he was the first to raise his hand. And I was like, oh, okay. And he says, I'm on my second marriage. I married my second wife about 10 years ago. And for the last 10 years, I've had my two stepdaughters live under my roof. They are now college age. And he said, if I'm being honest with you, up until we did this work, we just kind of lived under the same roof. I didn't really interact with them. And he said, over the last 6 months, I have interacted with them every day, and it's the best part of my day. And so when I first started hearing stories like this, it kind of caught me off guard, right? Because I did this training in a leadership and corporate environment. And whenever I would ask about the impact, they would almost always come back to an impact on their family. And so now I've come to expect that. And I've kind of asked the question, well, why is that? And one of the reasons why is because we oftentimes feel safer trying out a new elevated version of ourselves with our families before we are our colleagues.
Yeah.
And so that's been really cool to see. And so what I've realized from that and coming off of the Elevated Leader is these ideas are powerful for everybody. So I decided I wanted to write a book that is for anybody. And and it's about elevating themselves. So my latest book came out in June, just a little over 7 months ago. And it's called Becoming Better, the Groundbreaking Science of Personal Transformation. And it takes the concepts in the Elevated Leader and makes them more applicable. And I think one of the value adds is, since I wrote the Elevated Leader until I wrote Becoming Better, is my area of focus in terms of my research was on the neuroscience of leadership development. And so as we've talked a lot about that. And so that comes out, I think, heavier, but also communicated more effectively in Becoming Better.
Wow. Well, well, here's the thing, my friend. You're coming back to talk about that book at some point. So that just so you know, you can run, but you can't hide. I'm pretty fast on my feet. Okay, I love that. Now let's do this. Let's sprinkle some hope and possibility for our listeners and viewers. One of the things that I always say, I'm an organizational psychologist, in part because I believe in the power and the place of work in our lives. And I know it can be such a tremendously beautiful, important part of our lives when it goes well. And as leaders, we have such an opportunity to greatly impact and improve people's lives and serve all of those stakeholders you've been talking about. So let's do this to kind of bring it home. You mentioned a few really good examples of leaders that you showcase in the book that I think would be good to look to and aspire toward. We've talked about Satya Nadella, but this, I want to just sort of share some of these quotes and perspectives that you have in your book here. But you say that Satya Nadella, one of the things that he says is, I truly believe that each of us must find meaning in our work. The best work happens when you know that it's not just work, but something that will improve other people's lives. So we're not talking about, what quarter revenues that we're hitting here. Those are important. It's much bigger than that. So just want to give you a chance to comment on that. If you want to share the other quotes from Ed Catmull, Alan Mulally, or Frances Hesselbein, they're wonderful.
Yeah. So here's what we're going to see in the patterns of these elevated leaders' language is they will use words like empathy, harmony, compassion, purpose. Those are the types of words they lead with. They don't lead with let's win, let's advance, let's push harder. And that's the beauty of this fifth gear leadership, is because when we are emphasizing things like empathy, harmony, purpose, we are actually able to go faster, but it doesn't feel as fast.
Yeah.
And so that's the beauty. Like Frances Hesselbein is fantastic. And one of the things that she says that I love, and it really played a big role in my thinking with my latest book, is leadership is not about what to do, it's about how to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's ultimately what we're talking about with vertical development is we're not improving our doings, we're improving our being.
Yeah.
And that's when we could lead and impact. Let's go to some other examples. Let's take just stereotypical great examples. Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, right? These are people who have been very purposeful. And if we ask, like, why did they have their impact? Was it because they had specific knowledge or specific skills? No, not saying they weren't knowledgeable and weren't skillful. They surely were. The reason why they impacted the world was because of their being, who they were, not necessarily their knowledge and skills. And so I think that when we do this vertical development work, what we're doing is we're opening the door to help people to elevate their being, who they are. And then when we do that naturally, we're going to do better. And so that's, it's just it's a different frame of mind when it comes to our developmental strategy.
Ryan, you are such a gift. I'm so grateful to know you. I want to give you a chance to close the show in about, say, 20 seconds, knowing that this is heard by people around the world. This is what they care about, elevating their leadership and making the impact they crave. What would you like to leave them with?
Well, let's just come back to the idea that we brought up earlier, that vertical development and really improving ourselves, if we want to become better, we've got to heal our minds, our bodies, and our hearts. And as you kind of alluded to, we all have room for healing. And that doesn't mean that we have necessarily been hurt in extreme ways.
Right.
But we all have room for healing because we're human. And I hope this opens up a door for you to now sink your teeth into doing that healing work.
Ryan, you are such a gift. So glad to know you and share with my listeners and viewers. Listeners and viewers, you are going to want to follow this man, Ryan Gottfredson, the work he does, elevating leaders and culture through mindsets, and his books, one of which, of course, is The Elevated Leader. So follow him by going to his website. It's ryangottfredson.com. So Ryan, R-Y-A-N, Gottfredson is spelled Gottfredson. So find his website. He's also on LinkedIn. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on with Dr. Tim Elmore, the founder of Growing Leaders, an Atlanta-based nonprofit organization created to develop emerging leaders. We talked about his book, The Future Begins with Z, 9 Strategies to Lead Generation Z as they disrupt the workforce, which was an incredibly insightful conversation on how to motivate Gen Z and how leaders can best unleash their brilliance to reap the rewards within their organizations in doing so. Fantastic. You got to catch it. Next week, we'll be on the air with Gray McDowell talking about his book, Crafting a Corporate Camelot, where leadership becomes legend. See you then. And together, let's lean in and learn how to create destination workplaces where people thrive while doing business in a way that betters the world. Let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.